Hattie, how's your ma'am and them? God bless. Hope everybody's doing good out there. Danny Garcia versus Jose Benavidez Jr. is this weekend. And pretty easy fight to nail down for me, especially if you look at the betting odds and they tell a picture of how the odds makers feel this fight's going to play out. And I agree with them. More on that in a minute. But what do we make of the move of Danny Garcia from 147 to 154? Danny Garcia was a guy who over-exceeded expectations at 140. He came out of nowhere, upset guys like Amir Khan, Lucas Matisse. But in his move to 147, he sort of did the opposite. He performed his expectations at welterweight. It was sort of a mixed bag for him there. And now he's moving up to 154. If you look at Danny Garcia recently, he hasn't been very active. His dad's out there saying that the reason he lost to Errol Spence Jr. and the reason he hasn't been active is because he had anxiety during the COVID outbreak. So make with that of what you want. But where are we now with Danny Garcia? We're him moving up to 154. So you ask yourself, why would Danny Garcia move to 154 when he didn't have the power at 147 that he did at 140? In theory, you would think that would tell you that Danny Garcia wouldn't have power at 154 and his boxing ability wouldn't translate to a higher division. So when you ask yourself, why would he move up? It's pretty easy. It's the landscape. The landscape at 147 currently for Danny Garcia is not to his liking. Errol Spence Jr., he already fought him. Terrence Crawford doesn't want to fight him. And he doesn't want to serve as a glorified gatekeeper for guys to clout chase off of at 147, like Boots Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, Cody Crowley, Conor Benn, Stanionis. He does not want to be the bigger name A-side to young lions trying to feed off of him in that division. So he doesn't like the landscape at 147. He feels like he's exhausted the winnable options for himself at 147. And now the move to 154 is, I want a fresh landscape. I want an easier fight moving up to 154. And then he wants to try to leverage himself, and don't doubt me on this, that this is possible, try to leverage himself into an undisputed fight with Jermell Charlo at 154. It's an easy fight to make. And Danny Garcia feels like he has a name brand in order to jump other guys in the division in order to try to get a shot at all the belts against Jermell at 154. The issue with Danny Garcia at 154 is if you look at the top of the division, it's not a favorable division for him either when we talk about names, because these guys have been mixing it up with each other. These guys are a different breed than the guys at 147. The guys at junior middleweight have been mixing it up with each other, unlike the two sexy divisions surrounding it, welterweight and middleweight. 154, they've been mixing it up. Jermell Charlo has all the belts. You got Castano in there, who went a draw and a loss to Charlo. You've got young lions like Erickson Lubin, Tim Tszyu. You got Sebastian Fundora, and Tim Tszyu. And then you got another guy, a crafty vet, in Erickson Lubin, who can fight as well. I don't see Danny Garcia beating any of those guys. Any of them. I don't think any of those matchups are favorable to him. So although he may think the landscape is fresher and look better and not as talented at 147, I think he would be wrong. It's fresher for him, yes. And he has matchups that are possible for him there, are makeable, but I don't think any of them are winnable for him. So I think he's reached his limit as a fighter, both at 147 and 154. And I don't think it's going to be good for him going forward. But as far as this week in this fight, it's a fight that he should win. It's a fight that he should win because the odds makers have him as a minus 800 favorite. And what that means is you have to bet 800 on him just to win 100. He's a heavy, heavy favorite here against Benavidez Jr. And on top of that, they also tell you how they feel this fight is going to play out. The over-under in this fight is 10.5 rounds, and the under is priced at minus 270. So what they're telling you is they're pretty confident this is going to decision. Which is weird when you have two guys who are flat-footed, stand in the pocket, and throw power punches, right? You would think that fight would go under, that there would be a knockout in the fight. These two guys have a little bit of pop. Although Danny Garcia, we don't know at 154, but I think what Vegas is telling you here, I think what the odds makers are telling you here is Benavidez Jr. doesn't have as much pop as his KO percentage tells you. Danny Garcia won't have the pop at 154 that he had at 147. Definitely not what he had at 140. It's not going to translate up to 154. And on top of that, both of these guys have pretty good chins. Benavidez Jr.'s only loss is to Terrence Crawford. And there's just no shame in losing to Terrence Crawford. There's just no shame. But this will be a fun fight, I believe, because they will be in the pocket. They will be throwing power shots. They're not mobile guys. Danny Garcia fights on his heels. He's flat-footed. Benavidez Jr., a guy who got shot in his right leg 6 years ago. So ever since then, he hasn't been able to use it the way he was able to use it before, obviously. So that makes him a more stationary fighter as well. He's not the fighter that he was back in 2016. He's also been inactive. I think he's only fought once in the past 4 years leading into this fight. Danny Garcia's only fought 7 times in the past 6 years, or 6 times in the past 5 years, I believe. So he hasn't been very active himself, and he's only fought once since January 2020 against Errol Spence Jr. So these guys haven't been very active. I think there's going to be ring rust. I think there's going to be some sluggishness in spots, but I think it still will be fun and competitive for a little while. But there will be sluggishness, and this will go to decision, I believe. And the promoter, in this case, Al Heyman, he's not going to put the A side in any sort of threat in this case. And that tells you everything you need to know. And the odds makers tell you everything you need to know. This is going to go to decision. Danny Garcia should comfortably win on the cards. That's how it should play out. That's how it should play out on paper. But you never know. We'll see what the dog can do here. But I like Garcia by decision in this one. Peace.